Oh, faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally with the Book Talk. Today, we're introducing the book, The Positive Insides of Zeng Guofan. It's a historical biography by Zhang Hongji, a well-known best-selling author in history. Zhang Hongji mentioned that when he first thought of writing Zeng Guofan's biography, lots of friends told him not to do it because there's already tons of books out there making it tough to find a fresh angle. Oh. But Zhang Hongji thought there was much more to uncover about Zeng Guofan. Most biographies of Zeng Guofan we come across are just run-of-the-mill success stories, while a few others focus on big angles like his political and military roles. But not many dig into the details to bring out a lively three-dimensional Zeng Guofan. And, oh, you might know Zeng Guofan had mediocre talent but turned into a sage with effort. But did you know he wasn't big on hygiene? He'd wash his feet just once every few months. You've probably heard Zen Gufan was into health, meditating every day, but guess what? He aged early. By 30, he was sick all over, even coughed up blood one morning, fearing he wouldn't last long. Oh, and here's some gossip. Zeng Gufan got a skin condition that drove him crazy with itch, so he actually bought a concubine just to scratch his back. So, after all this, doesn't that stern, stiff old guy in your mind start to feel more real? Finally, he's relatable to everyday life. Today, we'll explore the positive and sides of Zeng Gufan through three angles to show you a fresh take on him. First up, how did Zeng Gufan go from being a plain country bumpkin to a sage? Next, as an official, was Zeng Gufan clean? And what was his financial life like? Lastly, why did Zeng Gufan, the sage, get into all that feudal superstition? From loving feng shui when young to fully believing in fate later on, what does that say about his mindset shift? First, let's dive into how Zeng Gufan became a sage. Zhang Hongji thinks Zeng Guofan's path to sagehood hinged on two big moments. At 30, he decided to be a sage, and at 47, he had a major awakening. He shifted from a stiff, upright official to a sage who was smooth on the outside but firm on the inside. Zeng Guofan was a complete ordinary person before 30, even worse than average. He took the Shukai exam 7 times before passing, like failing middle school entrance exams 7 times today. Luckily, his later exams for Jiren and Jinshi went smoother. At 28, Zeng Guofan passed the Jinshi exam and luckily entered the Hanlin Academy as a Shujishi. This was like joining a National Reserve program for high-level officials, likely leading to a big position. Zeng Guofan's hometown was in Shangshan County, Hunan Province, a very remote place during the Qing dynasty. And this acted as a rack pestilent DF. Before Zeng Guofan, Shangshan County produced few Shukai over centuries, let alone a Jinshi like him. So it's easy to imagine that before going to Beijing as an official, Zeng Guofan hadn't seen much of the world. Back then, he only thought about advancing his career, making money, and bringing glory to his ancestors in Beijing. But after arriving in Beijing, Zeng Guofan's mindset changed. As the political and cultural hub, Beijing gathered brilliant talents, and the Hanlin Academy was a hot spot for the elite. The moral refinement and self-pursuit of these top minds deeply shamed Zeng Guofan, who had prioritized fame and wealth. After profound self-examination, Zeng Guofan resolved to reinvent himself and learn to be a sage. Zeng Guofan wasn't just saying he'd become a sage, he meant it. From that decision day, he embarked on a full self-overhaul. His self-improvement method was daily lessons, where he supervised every aspect, eating, sleeping, all, holding himself to sage standards constantly. Plus, each night, he'd meticulously recall his daily conduct, note any failures to meet sage standards, and reflect deeply. For instance, one morning, after reading the I Ching, Zen Guofan went to his colleague Du Lanxi's son's wedding. After the wedding, he planned to go home and study in the afternoon. But he remembered it was his friend He Zijing's birthday, so he headed to He's place to celebrate. After dinner, then persuaded by He Zijing's enthusiasm, he stayed for Kunquai opera until night and dragged himself home exhausted. That very night, in his diary, he deeply reflected on failing to study and vowed to overcome his weak will. Oh, another example. Zeng Guofan used tremendous willpower to quit lust. Whenever he glanced at a beautiful woman during the day, he'd record it in his journal that night and deeply reproach himself. Even when it came to legitimate marital relations, he demanded minimal indulgence, living an almost ascetic life by his 30s. If you read Zeng Guofan's diaries from this period, you'd find him constantly trembling with anxiety and self-reproach. It's almost frightening. Such strict self-discipline, of course, paid off. For instance, Zeng Guofan, who had always had a pipe in hand, quit his smoking addiction in just a month. But not all flaws were as easy to kick as smoking. Shortcomings like being overly social, quick-tempered, or speaking recklessly, Zeng struggled repeatedly and never fully overcame them. After repeated failures, Zeng realized self-improvement isn't a one-time fix. Setbacks and relapses are normal. What matters is persistently working on self-correction and growth. Understanding this, Zeng stopped rushing. Instead, he turned sagehood into a lifelong mission, fixing his flaws slowly and steadily like a simmering pot. By then, you could say Zeng had his first rebirth. His second transformation came around age 47. Let's rewind 6 years. That year, Zeng was 41. His mother had passed away, so he was in his Hunan hometown observing the mourning period. Near year's end, Zeng suddenly received an imperial decree from Emperor Xianfeng ordering him to assist Hunan officials in organizing a militia, known as Tranlian, because by then the Taiping Rebellion had swept across half of China, and many cities in Hunan had fallen to the Taiping forces. The Qing dynasty's regular armies were repeatedly defeated, powerless against the Taiping, so the emperor turned to local militias for help. As someone aspiring to sagehood, Zeng naturally felt duty-bound to serve his country. Thus, after receiving the emperor's order, Zeng immediately set up a trial bureau in his residence to handle public security cases. At the time, after capturing parts of Hunan, the Taiping forces turned to attack Hubei. After the Taiping left, bandits and robbers across Hunan became restless. They wanted to take advantage of the chaos, so the top priority in governing Hunan was to restore public order. After setting up the trial bureau, Zeng Guofan took swift and severe action. Within 4 months, he executed over 100 bandits, scaring off others from causing trouble. Public order quickly returned. You'd think Hunan officials would be grateful to Zeng for such a big favor, but actually, the opposite happened. The whole provincial government saw him as an enemy, and the reason wasn't hard to grasp. Zeng stepped on others' toes. He bypassed all Hunan officials and took full control of public security cases. This essentially stripped other officials of their case-handling authority. Without that power, they couldn't extort money from criminals' families, cutting off their income stream. On top of that, Zeng worked with lightning speed. In under half a year, his personal achievements surpassed those of Hunan's entire bureaucracy. By standing out so much, didn't he just highlight everyone else's incompetence? So how could Hunan officials not hate him? Zeng actually understood all this, but back then, he was a typical angry young man. He deeply despised the corruption in officialdom, so even knowing he'd offend people, he did it anyway. But he soon paid a price for his sharp edges, even after stabilizing public order. Zeng's next step, naturally, was to organize the militia. The Qing's regular army was utterly corrupt and useless. So in building his new force, Zeng focused intensely on ideological training. He personally lectured soldiers monthly on loyalty, protecting civilians, and sacrificing for justice. But educating just his militia wasn't enough. He also brought in the Green Standard Army, the local regulars, for the same ideological training. Hunan officials, already hating Zeng, saw him encroaching on their turf again and secretly incited the Green Standard Army to riot. The rioters stormed Zeng's residence, injured several of his aides, and nearly hurt Zeng himself. When the matter reached Hunan's governor, Liu Bingzhan, he blatantly sided with the rioters, humiliating Zeng further. With things this bad, Zeng knew he couldn't stay in Hunan's official circles. So he took his militia to remote Hangyang, where he began grueling years of training. Without office space, he stayed in ancestral halls. Without military training experience, he learned from scratch. Without military pay, he sought donations from wealthy officials and gentry. Fortunately, after enduring hardships, Zeng Guofan finally trained an army of 17,000 men. Since he was from Hunan, it was named after the province's abbreviation, called the Xiang Army. In the 4th month of the 4th year of the Shanfeng reign, a contingent of the Xiang Army, with under 10,000 men, fought against 30,000 Taiping rebels and won decisively, wiping out over 10,000 rebels. This was the only major victory the Qing dynasty achieved since the Taiping Rebellion began. After this battle, the Qing dynasty, which had one foot in the grave, saw hope again. Emperor Xianfeng was overjoyed and issued a series of commendations to the Xiang army. If you think that from then on Zeng Guofan could command the wind and rain, sailing smoothly, you'd be wrong. Although the emperor praised Zeng Guofan countless times, he didn't grant him real power. Thus, Zeng, after winning battles, still faced military fund shortages and exclusion by local officials. Emperor Xianfeng understood this well, but he had his own schemes. Zeng was Han Chinese. What if he defeated the Taiping and then tried to overthrow the Qing to restore the Ming? Then Emperor Xianfeng's life would be over. So Emperor Xianfeng didn't want Zeng to grow stronger. He wanted Zeng to fight the Taiping with his current resources to mutual destruction, and then let his trusted Manchu Eight-Banner Army clean up. Thus, Emperor Xianfeng's support for Zeng was limited to verbal praise, with almost no substantial help. Xianfeng's attitude already made Zeng's situation tough, and coupled with Zeng's old habit of being an angry young man, which hadn't changed. So in subsequent battles, whether in Hunan or aiding in Jiangxi, Zeng was extremely embarrassed, constantly excluded and humiliated by colleagues. Just when Zeng was in great pain, he received news of his father's death. However, this bad news gave him a chance to threaten the emperor. Zeng's clever plan was to use his father's death to negotiate terms with the emperor. If the emperor didn't grant him real power, he would quit and go home to mourn his father. To Zeng's great surprise, Emperor Xianfeng went along with it, removed his military command, and let him stay home to mourn. Emperor Xianfeng did this not cause he was angered by Zeng Guofan into losing reason, but cause the Taiping rebels were weakened by internal splits at that time. Emperor Xianfeng figured that even without Zeng Guofan, he could still crush the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. So naturally, he wasn't threatened by Zeng anymore. While Zeng Guofan was at home mourning, his former subordinates soared through military achievements. For instance, Hu Linyi, who joined him as a prefect, was now the governor of Hunan, like jumping from mayor to provincial chief. Another example, Yang Zaifu, who was a battalion commander, got promoted to provincial commander, equivalent to rising from junior officer to military district boss. But Zeng Guofan, the Xiang Army founder, was stuck idly at home. His already fiery temper turned him into a powder keg, constantly cursing and ranting. After cursing all the Hunan and Jiangxi officials who'd wronged him, he'd pick fights and curse his own brothers. When his brothers were out, he'd curse their wives with vulgar words and baseless complaints. His saintly aura from the past vanished completely. In deep agony, Zeng Guofan picked up Laozi and Zhuangzi's works, recommended by a friend. These sages from millennia ago gave him unexpected insights, opening his eyes to a whole new world. Gradually, the resentful Zeng began reflecting on his troubles, realizing it wasn't just the emperor's pettiness or colleagues' selfishness. He saw his own flaws in temper, personality, and style. His strong moral superiority made him sharp-edged and condescending everywhere. But like when Wuchan was under threat, he wrote to request Luo Binzhan, Hunan's governor, for troop support. He was clearly begging for help, but his words carried an unquestionable, even mocking tone. The more he recalled those experiences, the clearer he saw his own shortcomings. He also finally grasped that Chinese society's unwritten rules couldn't be swept away overnight. To achieve big things, you gotta learn to be all-encompassing and inclusive, absorbing diverse ideas. After this thorough reflection, Zeng Guofan's thinking took a huge leap forward. The original angry young man Zeng Guofan vanished, replaced by the flexible yet principled Zeng we all know, the sage. Thus, Zeng Guofan's second life transformation was completed. As they say, man proposes, God disposes. Zeng Guofan originally thought the Taiping Rebellion had nothing to do with him anymore. Unexpectedly, after internal strife, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom had a resurgence and repeatedly defeated the Qing army. Suddenly, the Qing court was terrified, and Emperor Shanfeng had to reinstate Zeng Guofan. Zen changed his sharp-edged attitude, becoming humble, thoughtful, and socially adept. With this, he quickly established himself in the once inhospitable officialdom, with fewer enemies and more supporters. Free from worries, Zeng Guofan pressed on, suppressed the Taiping Rebellion, and secured his position as the top of the four great ministers of the late Qing. Earlier, we kept mentioning how Zeng Guofan struggled with lack of funds for war. Now let's talk about Zeng Guofan's lifelong financial situation as a whole. Shang Hanji believes that Zeng Guofan's financial situation can be divided into three stages. First, as a capital official. Second, founding the Xiang Army. Third, serving as a governor. Speaking of the capital official stage, Zeng's financial situation can be summed up in one word: destitute. To what extent? Zeng wrote in a family letter that he really wanted to visit home, but thinking about the over 1,000 taels of silver debt in Beijing and the several hundred taels needed for the trip, it was too hard to raise the funds, so he gave up the idea. Pitifully, during his 13 years as a capital official, Zeng never returned home even once. By this time, Zeng was already a second-rank right vice minister of rights, equivalent to a deputy minister of propaganda. Why was he so poor? This brings us to the Qing dynasty's salary system. The Qing dynasty implemented a low salary system, meaning officials' wages were very low. For example, when Zeng was a Hanlin Academy compiler, equivalent to a department-level official, his annual salary plus benefits totaled only about 120 taels of silver. Yet, even living very frugally, a capital official's annual expenses were over 300 taels. So, an ordinary capital official had an annual deficit of nearly 200 taels, unlike local officials who held real power and could obtain various gray incomes. Therefore, like many capital officials, Zeng had to rely on borrowing to get by year after year. From Zeng's later letters, it's clear that the debts he incurred as an official in Beijing weren't fully paid off until 12 years after he left. At that time, Zeng Guofan had entered his later years. In the second year of the Xianfeng reign, Zeng Guofan's mother passed away, and he ended his 13-year life as a capital official to return home for mourning. Unexpectedly, after less than a year at home, he received the emperor's order to come out and assist Hunan officials in organizing the militia. This marked the beginning of the second stage of Zeng Guofan's life. And in the stage of founding the Xiang Army, as we mentioned before, the Qing dynasty's regular army was utterly corrupt and powerless. And the main reason for military corruption, you've probably guessed, is the same as for officials. Wages were too low. Zeng Guofan learned from this lesson and tightened his belt to pay high salaries to the soldiers. So, obviously, as the leader of the Xiang Army, Zeng Guofan's legal salary was also high. But during this time, the money Zeng Guofan sent home was actually less than when he was a capital official. Why is that? The author believes there are two main reasons. First, when Zeng Guofan came out, he vowed not to seek money and not to fear death. As a sage, he had to keep his word. Second, Zeng Guofan strictly enforced integrity in the army, so naturally he had to lead by example and not let others criticize him. So where did Zeng Guofan's legal salary go? According to records, Zeng Guofan's salary had two main uses. One was to supplement military funds, and the other was for relief, people displaced by the war. It's worth mentioning that Zeng Guofan specifically instructed his brother Zeng Guofan not to leave his name when giving money to the people. Finally, let's talk about Zeng Guofan's financial situation during his time as a governor. As we mentioned earlier, in the 8th year of the Xianfeng reign, the Tapping Rebellion spiraled out of control again, forcing the emperor to reinstate him. Emperor Xianfeng appointed Zeng Guofan as the viceroy of Lianjiang. At that time, the viceroy of Lianjiang was equivalent to the governor of Jiangxi, Anhui, and Jiangsu provinces combined with military commander wielding significant power. During this phase, Zeng Guofan's income was indeed much higher than when he was a capital official. His base salary, plus various benefits, totaled over 18,000 taels, equivalent to over 3 million RMB. You might think, hey, now Zeng Guofan could live a few days of wealthy life. But in fact, no, Zeng Guofan's life remained as frugal as ever. It's said that his wife, Lady Ouyang, was long turned frugal in managing the household, personally doing everything like cooking, washing clothes, and weaving. So where did Governor Zeng's money go? Oh, here we go again, talking about the Qing dynasty's salary system. In our minds, everyone in a government office, from top officials down to the janitor, should be paid by the state, right? And in the Qing dynasty, because the emperor was lazy, only the governor himself was a state-recognized official in the whole governor's office, and all his staff had to be hired out of his own pocket. Whether hiring one person or 10, the emperor didn't care. Of course, he wouldn't pay a dime. The governor had to cover all costs himself. So, besides that, when the governor inspected troops and rewarded good soldiers, he paid for it himself. Even sending letters to the emperor cost him money. You might think this is unbelievable, but this was the actual situation in the Qing dynasty. All these governor's office expenses added up to over 60,000 taels of silver a year, meaning even after deducting Zeng Guofan's salary, there was still a deficit of over 40,000 taels, worse than when he was a capital official. So how did he get by? For others, the solution was simple. Just collect some tribute from subordinates. Research by the famous scholar Zheng Zhengli shows that governors back then received an average of 180,000 taels in tribute annually, enough to cover 3 years of expenses. But don't forget, Zeng Guofan wanted to be a sage. Such money-grabbing stuff he couldn't do. Taking money broke his principles, but not taking it meant he couldn't survive. So what to do? Zeng Guofan took a compromise. He refused most gray income, only accepting a small part each year to cover official costs. If there was any surplus, he never pocketed it but quietly donated the money. Although Zeng Guofan didn't become a famously incorruptible official like Hai Rui, looking at his lifelong finances, it's still admirable. Finally, let's see why the sage Zeng Guofan was so into feudal superstition. Logically, a Confucian intellectual like Zeng Guofan should follow not speaking of spirits and monsters, as Confucius taught. But Zeng Guofan was a big advocate of feudal superstition. He was skilled in face reading and fortune telling, believed in dreams, Guangong, and the smallpox god, who helps avoid smallpox. In short, Zeng Guofan dabbled in all common superstitions, but the ones that most influenced his life were feng shui and fate. And Zeng Guofan's belief in feng shui started from a personal experience. In the 26th year of the Daowang reign, Zeng Guofan's grandmother passed away. After she was buried, the Zhen family suddenly had a streak of good luck. Grandpa recovered from illness, Zeng's skin condition healed, and he even got promoted. This good fortune kept going even 3 years later. That year, the family welcomed 3 boys. His brothers, Zeng Guofan, passed the Siuchai exam, and Zeng himself got promoted again to Right Vice Minister of Rights. Since he'd heard lots of stories about feng shui bringing prosperity, Zeng chalked up his family's run of luck to the good feng shui of his grandma's burial site. So his superstition in it shot way up. Later, when Zeng Guofan's dad passed away, he buried him in a place called Zhu Bichang. But after the burial, a feng shui master said the spot was cursed. So Zeng brought in several big-name masters to pick a new grave site, but never found one he liked. In the 8th year of the Shanfeng reign, Zeng came out of retirement again, and before leaving, he told his brother Zeng Guobao to keep at it and find an auspicious feng shui spot to move their dad's grave. Shortly after Zeng came back, the Xiang Army got crushed in the Battle of Sanhe. Zeng Guofan's brother Zeng Guohua also died in that battle. Remembering what the feng shui master said about his dad's grave being cursed, Zeng immediately decided the Xiang Army's loss and his brother's death were all down to feng shui. So he wrote home right away, telling his family to fix up a better feng shui spot for his dad ASAP. Logically, that should have made Zeng a true believer in feng shui from then on. But soon Zeng remembered something else. This incident shifted him from believing in feng shui to believing in destiny. Back then, Zeng hadn't come out of retirement yet. One day, his brother Zeng Guofan invited someone for Fuji, a type of folk fortune-telling. Tseng, with time to kill, joined in and casually asked about the Xiang Army's future battles, which were going pretty well at the time. Tseng totally expected a good reading, but whoa, the Fuji spelled out the character for defeat. When Zhang pressed for details, the guy said, this defeat wasn't just about the war. It messed up the Zhang family's fortune too. Zhang was half doubting it then, but now, linking it to the Sanhe defeat and his brother's death, Zhang felt a chill deep inside and from then on started believing in destiny. From then on, the term mandate of heaven popped up more and more in Zeng Guofan's vocabulary. Like after the Xiang army recaptured Nanjing, the court deliberately belittled Zeng Guofan to stop heroes from getting too powerful, making him so mad he fell seriously ill. Zeng Guofan consoled him, saying, recapturing such a big city like Nanjing, half was human effort, half was the mandate of heaven. It's not all your credit, so no need to be upset. At this point, you could say Zeng Guofan's view of the mandate of heaven was still rational and kind of positive. But as he got older, he believed in it more deeply, shifting from seeing human effort and fate as 50-50 to thinking fate took 70% and effort just 30. Entering old age, Zeng Guofan's superstition in the mandate of heaven hit an all-time high. He started thinking everything in life was decided by the mandate of heaven, and human effort could hardly change a thing. You might laugh at him for being foolishly superstitious, but hey, this shows a psychological shift in his later years. When Zeng Guofan was young, he was mentally tough and believed man could conquer nature. So ideas like the mandate of heaven didn't move him. Instead, feng shui, which you could tweak with human effort, drew him in more. But ever since he came out to build the Qing army, His life was full of setbacks. The death of his brother Zeng Guofan hit him real hard. Oh, it made him see fate's unpredictability for the first time, and that's when the mandate of heaven entered his view. Later in life, even though he rose to high ranks and was famous worldwide, his four daughters all had tragic fates. What hurt him even more was what he fought so hard to save. The Qing dynasty kept declining with no turning back. He said more than once he wished to die early to avoid seeing the country fall apart before his eyes. Zeng Guofan, who once believed man could conquer nature, finally saw that in big historical events, he was powerless. Overwhelmed by helplessness, he turned to believing in the mandate of heaven for relief. If everything's destined by heaven, then being powerless wouldn't hurt so much. All right, that's pretty much it for the book's content. Now, let's wrap it up. Whether in personal growth or national contributions, Zhang Guofan counts as a sage in the Confucian system. Oh, for over a century, countless people have highly revered him. But looking back today, this sage had too much helplessness. He wanted to be clean, but pressured by the system, had to take gray income. He suppressed the Taiping rebellion. But when corrupt governments fell, others like the Neon Army and Boxers rose. He was like a screw in the rotting Qing dynasty, twisting desperately only to tighten the mistakes. In the end, all he could hope was not to see this dynasty fall off the cliff with his own eyes. If fate truly exists, Zhang Guofan probably didn't have the lucky kind. All right, that concludes our interpretation of the positive and sides of Zhang Guofan. Listening notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.